Hello and welcome back to Watch Our History, the podcast that covers all areas of history, heritage and archaeology, no matter how big or how small, how well known or how niche. Today's guest was Bee, and she was talking to me about the descendants of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was the last Sikh ruler of Punjab. It was really interesting to learn about the descendants of this very interesting person, so I hope you enjoy. Hello, Bee.
Hello, Katie.
So, what is it about Ranjit Singh's descendants that got you interested in why you want to talk about them in particular? Why not him and just his descendants?
I think I will be talking a little bit about Ranjit Singh because you cannot talk about his descendants until you talk about him. And there is a really big story about how his son even came to England and his descendants lived in England and did a lot of social work in England. And I think that's important to cover how these Punjabi princesses ended up in this country. So it's really interesting because I think that they give a sort of unique overlap between Indian history and British history, because I feel like, people think or used to think that the world was a lot less globalized than it was. Like, in the late 1880s, there were Indian people living in England being treated as princes, and there were princesses in like 1900s in England. And you wouldn't think that England was so diverse at that time, but it was. Not as much as it is today, but it definitely was. So I think that's an interesting parallel there. And I also want to talk about one of his descendants in particular, who I think is sort of an icon of intersectional feminism. So not just feminist work, but also intersectionality with other issues like race, class, refugees, everything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's really cool. I think when it comes to Indian and British history, unfortunately, we look at it in a very negative light because of all the bad things that we did. So I think this is probably why a lot of people don't really register it so much in the UK, because we're just like, we did a thing.
Yeah, it's something you want to like avoid because you're like, oh, that was bad. Let's not talk about it. But I think it's interesting to talk about it because there were there were definitely positives that came out of it. I'm not going to say that it was like, it wasn't bad or anything. There were a lot of bad things that happened, but I think we need to look back on these things as a shared history and not as just like something that we just never talk about. I just think, with a lot of questions of repatriation or decolonizing history, a lot of it needs to be thought of as a shared look into the past with like not blaming anyone for anything, but more so just seeing how we can learn from the past and work on current relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose if you are interested in history as well, you will see that sort of thing as well. And instead, because I know with the Indian history, because people were in India, you do actually see it in the fashions of that time. Like a lot of men were like inspired by some of the outfits and things, so they would change their uniforms or even just their day-to-day wear would look very similar to what you'd find in India. And a lot of like architecture in some of obviously grander buildings, not everyday people could afford this, but in the grander buildings you can see like the influence in like architecture and the art style. So it is definitely there. Yes. And I think what you were just saying there, that having to see it as more of a shared thing of going, we shared ideas rather than we did a bad thing. Yeah, I think that's really important.
I mean, there's a reason the national dish of this country is curry. Like like the UK loves Indian culture, and I see it like every time it's summer and you walk into a Primark or an M&S and you see all the clothes that people want to wear. It's all Indian patterns, Indian designs, but the UK just loves Indian culture so much. They keep going back to it, and I think that's based on the shared history that we have. So I think Sophia, the leap Singh, who I'm going to talk about, sort of personifies that while also being a trailblazing woman, a very feminist woman at a time where it wasn't, you know, best to be one. And the fact that she's not white and she's of a different race adds a little bit more to her feminism. Also, she being the goddaughter of Queen Victoria was almost invincible, and she could get away with things that other suffragettes couldn't get away with.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about it in depth today. Yeah.
I was going to say, so what is it about her in particular that makes her a trailblazer?
I think it's definitely, if you look into her history, there's so many women that have inspired her. And I mean, her grandmother was a trailblazing woman herself, a rebel queen, she was called. Queen Victoria as well was quite a revolutionary monarch, you know, empress of half of the world. It doesn't happen easily. And when you've got all these women that have built you up, you do great things. So Sophia was not just someone who rallied for women. She rallied for Indians, for labor, she rallied for refugees. She did so much work for the betterment of the community, and she used her position of power to actually make a change rather than just, you know, enjoy being a princess and just buy fancy gowns and big houses. She was out there volunteering for causes. There is a very iconic photograph of her. She was given a house by Queen Victoria and she lived at Hampton Court Palace, one of the houses in there. And there is a very iconic photo of her selling copies of the Suffragette out on the street. And she basically, her philosophy was every single penny towards the cause counts. And she was quite a pain in the ass for the British government, but no one could do anything about her because what can you do? She's the goddaughter of the late Queen. You can't say anything to her. So I think that was a very interesting way that she used her position of power and her history to do better for the people of this country and also for her country back home as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, what do you think it was that actually introduced her to the suffragette movement? Because being a princess, she probably wouldn't have been she wouldn't have been interacting really with everyday people. So I'm wondering, just like, how had she been exposed to the suffragette movement to be part of it?
I've tried to find this online, but I can't find any sort of reason as to why she got involved. The only thing is that one of her friends invited her to join the Women's Social and Political Union, I believe it was called. And from that point on, she was involved. But I think a lot of it might have come from her dad's philanthropy as well. He used to do a lot of work for the cause of especially Lashkars, who Indian seamen, so they used to load and unload cargo ships and also travel with the cargo. And a lot of the times they would be left stranded in London with no way to get back home. And he used to assist them, try and find them jobs in London, try to find them homes. And she took up that cause later in her life as well. And I think that might be one of the contributing factors to getting her into the suffragette movement. I think another thing that influenced her might have been she went on a trip to India in 1905 with her sisters, and the experiences that she had there might have sort of inspired her to work for the people, for the betterment of the people that she lived with, the women that she lived with and around. And I think the three sisters, so Sophia, Catherine and Bamba, all three of them were dedicated to the suffragette cause, and together they might have inspired each other as well.
that's actually really, really cool, especially the idea that they all joined forces and kind of shared stories with each other. So you said she's got sisters and they were doing the suffragette thing. Did her sisters do anything else as well, or was it just her that became a suffragette, or did anything of note?
So her sisters were also cool people. Bamba, one of her sisters, was the only one that decided to move back to India at the time. So she moved to India and married a professor of a medical college, and there she continued the suffragette cause, but with the context of Indian women. Indian women got the vote with the independence of India in 1947.
Oh, wow.
And there she was a pioneer for that cause. So while Bamba was doing that in India, Catherine, on the other hand, that's Sophia's older sister, Catherine was not a suffragette, she was a suffragist. So she did not like the more violent, quote-unquote, methods of the suffragettes. She believed that they should ask for voting rights via legal methods, but she still supported her sisters in their endeavors. Catherine actually had a governess when she was young, Lena Schaefer, a German teacher who lived with them. And as she grew older, she fell in love with her governess, and together they moved to Germany and lived most of their life in Germany. And while she was there, obviously this was around the early 1900s, throughout World War One times. Throughout the First World War, she was helping refugees, evacuees escape to England, and especially during the Second World War, she acted as guarantor for a lot of Jewish families to be able to escape via Switzerland, via other routes that they could to England. Once they got to England, her sister Sophia would settle them in Hampton Court Palace at her house and try and find them jobs, try and find them places to live. So both the sisters would work together to just stick it up to the Nazis and get the Jewish families out of there. So she did that for a really long time, around the start of the rise of the Nazi Party. But in, I believe, 1937, she had to leave as well, because the risk to her life as a colored woman living in Nazi Germany, and also a lesbian at that, who were also in a very small number, but they were persecuted and put in concentration camps as well. She had to leave, so she sold all of her properties and left via Switzerland back to England, but she died a year later. So that was Catherine's life, but she was also really cool. And an interesting thing is that all of her family knew about her love with Lena Schaefer, but they were all okay with it. There's actually letters between her and Sophia where she talks about her love for Lena, and Sophia just like, okay, you go girl, essentially. And I think to have that in like the early 1900s, especially from people who have like Indian heritage, is a bit crazy, because India is not the most progressive country in terms of, gay marriage yet. But yeah, I think that's an interesting thing that Catherine did as well. So her sisters were also really cool women in their own rights.
Yeah, they do genuinely sound it, in all fairness. And it's that, yeah, you can understand why the basically trailblazers and stuff like that, because you've got one who's two, that's suffragettes, one that's a suffragist, which, like you pointed out as well, just in case anybody doesn't know the differences, a suffragist is basically, like Bee's already said, they're more like the peaceful side, it's more like the politicians' side, and going, we need to do the politics, get the paper out there, make them heroes. Whereas the suffragettes were like, screw that, we're using bombs, we're going to kick off.
Yeah, we're marching onto the Prime Minister's house, we want this now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to give you the definition between the two just in case. But no, that generally does sound really cool. So I know that's really cool about them. And you said that they're the descendants of the Maharaja. Are there his grandchildren or his children or?
They're his granddaughters, which is really interesting. I always think about, I wonder what he would think if he had ever known them, but he never did. If you want, I can tell you a little bit more about Ranjit Singh, because I feel like that will put into context the kind of history that these women were coming from as well.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a history lesson there for you, because Sophia's story and her sister stories, they don't start with their birth. They start like years before these girls are born as well. So Ranjit Singh was a young boy from the Suffragette missile, which is the Suffragette clan, and in 1801 he, after a series of military conquests, he declares himself the Maharaja of Punjab. So, for anyone that doesn't know, Punjab is a region in the northwest of India. When the British were in charge in India, quote unquote, Punjab was much larger, and it encompassed parts of what is now Pakistan as well. It was split in half during the independence, but Punjab was a really large frontier province, and it was subject to a lot of invasions from Afghanistani rulers, from Persian rulers, from any other Indo-Iranian plateau rulers that would want to come in. So the fact that Ranjit Singh was able to set up a kingdom in that space was already a very revolutionary thing. Secondly, he was a Sikh ruler, which was something that had never happened before. Sikhism, also, for anyone doesn't know, I'm not going to do like a big thing because it's just like, it's the history of an entire religion, but it's basically a religion that believes in the teachings of 10 gurus, and what you need to know, the main core ideas are charity, humility, and especially tolerance of every other religion in the world. So Sikhism starts off as a philosophy rather than a religion, and it started off in a time where there was a big religious divide in this specific in the specific region of India between Hindus and Muslims and any other religion. So Sikhism is like an in-between, and it takes elements from both religions and gives a philosophy of preaching love and care. And basically, Ranjit Singh, being the first Sikh ruler, was able to sort of mollify the Indian clan leaders in the area and also the Muslim clan leaders. So they were both respecting him, and they were both sides were happy to have him in the emperor position at the time.
Well, I would approve of him as well, because it's like, oh, if he's okay with me and he's okay with you, it's the ideal person, really.
Live and let live, bro. Yeah. So he becomes ruler of Punjab, and after that, it's basically just, the way that any kingdom goes. You have the up and the golden age and the zenith, and then you have the down. In the golden age, though, Ranjit Singh built up a lot of wealth. He had a lot of military conquests against Afghani rulers, and Durrani Shah Zaman, who was the leader of the Durrani Empire at the time. And from one of his conquests, he also gained the Kohinoor. So while it was mined in India, it was taken away again, and it was Ranjit Singh who won it back from the Afghani emperor at the time. He won it back, and he had it in his treasury. He used to actually wear it on an armband on his arm, because he did not want to cut it down to fit any sort of jewelry. He wanted the full thing in its prestige. So he used to wear it on his arm. He also really, really enjoyed having foreigners in his court. So he would invite Frenchmen, Englishmen, Germans, all sorts of people were invited into his court. He invited two French commanders to teach his army as well, to sort of modernize them to the ways of Western warfare at the time. Speaking of his army, because he was a Sikh emperor, he had access to the Khalsa army. What is the Khalsa army, you ask? So Sikhism, towards the end of its birth, essentially, with the first five gurus, it was more of a philosophy. It was a lot more about helping people open kitchens, getting rid of the caste system that was established by the Hindus. But with the last five gurus, there was a shift in the political climate of India, where the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb was sort of, he was evil and wreaking havoc on any other kingdom that he could find. And the Sikh gurus at the time developed a formalized religion and a martial religion that would be there to defend you if you needed to be defended against anyone else. So they were defending Hindu rulers, they were defending Muslim rulers, whoever needed help and whoever was being wronged, they were meant to be there. So that was a martial race at the time. And Ranjit Singh, being a Sikh ruler for the first time, had access to this martial army. There is a very specific martial race within Sikhism as well. They're called the Nihangs, and the only thing they do is stay in Sikh temples and practice traditional Sikh warfare. And because he was a Sikh ruler, he had access to the Nihangs as well. So he built up a Khalsa army, a Sikh army that would do whatever he wanted them to do. And they had their own moral requirements as well. So there was a time where they did not like the fact that he married someone who was a common dancer girl, so a Notch girl. They didn't like it, and he had to do penance in the Golden Temple, which is the biggest Sikh temple in India, because they disapproved of him, of his bride. So he was also beholden to the army. Like, they were a sort of check on his power as well, and just because he was able to access their power doesn't mean that they can't crush him if they wanted to.
Yeah, well, you see that sort of thing in other places as well. Like, not so much of an army over here. Like, for example, for British history, well, sorry, English history, we ended up getting like the Magna Carta being put in
Yes.
place, and that was to keep the kings and queens in check, because it's like,
Yes.
excuse me, but you can't be doing blah blah blah
Yes.
sort of thing. So, I mean, it's not necessarily an army, but it's, I suppose, in some ways similar sort of concept.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I suppose it's the same with anywhere. You don't want people to have all the power,
Yeah.
because then
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can, obviously, they can manipulate and things like that. But even with that amount of power that he had and being kept in line, he still sounds like he was a forward-thinking person and caring for the country
Yeah. Yeah.
in a very positive way.
Yes, I think there's several stories that people will tell you. A lot of the times, I think they can get apocryphal as well, because he's just such an iconic character in Sikh history. But there's stories about how when every time famine struck Punjab, he would open up the food stores of the palace to the people. Every time there was an event, a special event in his house, like his grandson getting married, he would throw gold coins into the audience and share his wealth with the people as well. He had uh, Sikh temples built, he had mosques built, Hindu temples built, and every time he would get out on the street and celebrate festivals with the people as well. This is all well documented in any historical source that you would read about Ranjit Singh. He was very tolerant ruler, and he had both Hindus and Muslims at very high levels in his court as well. So he prioritized a person's abilities rather than their religion, and that was something that a lot of people couldn't get behind at the time. But he knew the kinds of intelligent and able people that he wanted in his court, and he would select them. He wouldn't give a damn about what temple they went to pray at. And that was a really interesting thing with Ranjit Singh as well.
Yeah, well, that's what it should be like. That's what the world should be like now. In all fairness, it still isn't, unfortunately.
Still
So
isn't.
you said that he was the last Maharaja of Punjab. So who was in charge of Punjab afterwards then?
He was the first Maharaja of Punjab. His son was the last Maharaja of Punjab. So Ranjit Singh, he had so much power that the kingdoms around him treated him with respect. He also fought for a lot of kingdoms, a lot of his friends. So he maintained a strong alliance with the king of Nepal at the time, Jung Bahadur, and they fought together against the Kashmiri rulers at the time. So he built a lot of alliances, which meant that he wouldn't get attacked. The only threat to his power at the time was the British, who were slowly and steadily gaining control of more and more of India. And it's well documented that he had nightmares that one day the entire map of India would be covered in red, was the color that the British flag was at the time, that the entire map of India would be covered in red. And as his kingdom was growing, that is what was happening in other parts of India. So the British would either conquer or annex a lot of smaller kingdoms into their territories. The Bengal presidency, which the British had 3 different presidencies in India. This is still the East India Company at the time. So the Bengal presidency was the closest one to the Sikh Empire. And what Ranjit Singh did was to extend a hand of friendship to the British rather than maintain bad relations with them. So
did that work in his favour?
Well, while he was alive, yes, it did. So because he was outwardly friends with the British, he would, every time British officers would visit his court, he would receive them as friends. He would impart a lot of gifts on them, the whole diplomatic 9 yards. But he would also show them military demonstrations, show them his artillery, show them the powerful weapons that he had. And basically it was like a weird power play where you've got
but don't mess with us,
but also don't mess with me because I've got my fucking sacred army. I'll unleash them on you. And that seemed to work. He said he wanted to be friends with the British, but you can read from accounts of the time that he never really trusts them fully.
Valid. Yes. I wouldn't trust them either.
Which you wouldn't at the time. The East India Company. Yes.
That's for another day.
Yes. So while he's alive, nothing really happens. He dies naturally. He has had 2 strokes while he's been alive. He's at the very end of his life in 1839. And after he dies, obviously, as happens with a lot of big kingdoms that leave a lot of legitimate heirs, there's wars of succession. And he had a lot of sons who got to the thrones and then were killed in many different brutal ways, which I will not get into. But the one that came out on top was Dalip Singh. Dalip Singh at the time, though, was only 5 years old. He
became the ruler.
And he became the ruler. He was the youngest son of Ranjit Singh from his youngest wife. And that's where the story of Ranjit Singh ends. But it sort of lives on in his last wife, his youngest wife, who became the regent, the queen regent, and she basically ruled the kingdom in her son's stead because her son is so young. But because she was his last wife at the time, he was looking for someone who would be intelligent as much as she was beautiful. And she was actually, her name was Jindan Kaur, and she was actually the daughter of the royal dog keeper.
Okay.
The royal dog trainer. Yeah, Ranjit Singh loved keeping dogs and different animals.
Would she not be considered like below him or something? Because if he's already getting kicked off for a dancer,
you would think so. But it was fine. Yeah, he got married to her. He was a king. Well, what can you do? But
I'm still baffled. Wait a minute. So the army gets pissed off with him for getting with a dancer, but they're fine with him getting with a dog trainer.
Well, the dog trainer's daughter, yeah.
Sorry, dog trainer's daughter.
That's because I think the reason for that is because the dance girl has a negative connotation. They live and work where prostitutes work, and it just has implications that might have been lost to history. And I think that's why the Khalsa army were mad that he married a Nach girl. But with Jindan, she was, she wasn't a royal, she was a commoner, but she was still a regular Sikh girl. I think that's another thing that they like, that she was Sikh and not of any other religion. But she got married to him when she was 18, and he was like, I don't know, 50 years old. He was really old.
That's nothing new. That's happened in like every single culture out there.
That's nothing new. But as he was spending his last few years with her, he was seeing the way that his kingdom would decline when he died, because he could see the animosity growing between his own sons and his grandsons as well. And he would warn her, because she had his youngest heir, and he would warn her of the ways that the British can deceive her, the ways that her own court will be able to deceive her. And obviously she didn't know at the time why he was telling her all these things, but he would talk to her about his military conquests as well. He would talk to her about the army, he would talk to her about his viziers, he would talk to her about anything under the sun, because he felt that she wasn't just there to be a queen. I don't know how to explain this.
He was basically preparing her.
So
by telling her stories of like his conquests, or how to run an army, or what you need to do in certain political situations and stuff, he was preparing her, knowing that he probably knew that his time was limited.
Yes, yeah.
And he was probably like, well, my son's going to be on the throne, but he's a Bane, so he can't really rule. So this is what you need to learn in order to run the country. So that's probably what it was.
Yes.
Which is actually really cool, and the fact that he noticed that, and obviously, in a way, predicted that his youngest was going to ultimately rule. That's really interesting. So, about the girls, the sisters that you talked about earlier. So, I know there is grandchildren, but through which son or which relative are they? So why were they in England?
Dalip Singh's daughters. He was the only surviving son at the end of the Wars of Succession, and obviously because he was the only surviving one, the court had to do everything they can to keep him alive. So Sophia, Catherine and Bamba are his daughters, and they're Jindan and Ranjit Singh's granddaughters.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So the 5-year-old's daughters.
They're the 5-year-old's daughters, yes. Which is interesting because all of this happens within like one person's lifetime. And that's just really crazy to me. Because there's like 75 years between the establishment of the Sikh Empire and the birth of Sophia. And within that time frame as well, the world changed so much. And that is just insane to me. Within the life of Dalip Singh, he was 5, and the Sikh Empire was at its best. And towards the end of his life, photography was invented. He was living in Paris. Would you ever thought of that? The world wars had happened. So many things had occurred, and he had seen so much more of the world than his father did as well. It's really interesting, and I feel like his daughters get their rebellion from him and from his mother, because while he was on the throne at age 5, it wasn't him in charge. Obviously, he did what his mom told him to do, and she was the one who was actually in charge, which was a crazy thing at the time as well, because women in Sikh court as well. It was built upon Mughal court, where women would be segregated. So they had a different section. Every time the court was in session, women were in a different section. They wouldn't be seen where the king and the men were seen. But what was Jindan going to do? So she would appear in court with her son, not in the segregated women's section. She would stand right next to him on the throne, and she would talk directly to the army, which was a thing that, they were like, why would women do that? Why would a woman be at the army barracks? But she would go there directly before major battles. She would talk to the army directly, and they revered her as like a Sikh mother. And that was one of the reasons why she was able to keep her son on the throne for so long, because she knew that if she appealed to the Khalsa army like her husband had done, she would be able to hold on to the throne for longer. And that was really interesting, that she was already changing so much of the Sikh culture in the Sikh court at the time. And obviously her granddaughters were doing the same years later in England, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah. Did they ever get a chance to meet their grandma?
No.
So it just must be in the blood then.
It must be in the blood, yes. Well, their grandma was in charge of the Sikh Empire for about 2 years before things happen. The first Anglo-Sikh War happens, and the British defeat the Sikhs. That's because the commander-in-chief of the Sikh army was treacherous. He was a traitor, and he was actually working with the British to help them take over the empire. And once they did that, they promised him a high position in court.
Which I'm assuming they probably didn't give to him.
They actually did.
Yeah. Oh, they did?
What came out of that war was basically the British got a lot of territory of Punjab. They got handed over the state of Kashmir at the time, which was part of the empire, which is just up in the north in India. They got handed that over. The Sikh court had to pay them war indemnity, price for the war. And lastly, they had a British army installed at the court of Lahore. So that was quote unquote for the protection of the young Maharaja. And they said that his mother could still remain as regent. While they did this, months later, they actually incited a rebellion within Lahore and claimed that they crushed the rebellion. They started it, they crushed it, and they claimed that they couldn't do this anymore. It was unsafe for the young king, and they replaced his mother with a British run council of advisors, and they pensioned her off and confined her to her house for, like, who knows how long. So she wasn't able to she wasn't able to instruct her son in what to do, because she was the one who would incite rebellion in her son, because she would tell him not to do certain things that the British were telling him to do, because obviously she was like, no, they want to take over your kingdom. That's why they're making you do that.
Yeah, use that noggin of yours. This is what your dad wanted, so just listen to me. Words of wisdom.
But he's like 9 years old.
Well,
like,
yeah.
This poor boy. And so they pension her off. They give her 150,000 rupees, which is £15,000 at the time. That's what's promised to her for the pension. A year later, though, she manages to ask her son to not appoint someone as the commander that the British want to be appointed. Once she does that and her son refuses to appoint someone in a ceremonial manner, they decide that it's too risky to keep her there, and she's sent off to a different fort and imprisoned. She gets separated from her 9-year-old son, and her pension's reduced to £4,000 for the year, and the British refused to let her meet her son.
Of course they did.
Of course they did. And after that, she has to be transferred to a more secure prison. She has her jewelry stolen, and while she's there, she is treated quite terribly, to the point where people find out about it because she smuggles out letters to newspapers. That was another thing that she would do, is she would, while she was in prison, write to local newspapers about the way that the British were treating local rulers and treating the Queen of Punjab. She wrote to local newspapers, and they were treating her so terribly, to the point that the Afghani ruler, who was enemies with her husband, wrote a formal complaint to the British saying, hey, stop that. Why are you doing that to that poor lady? While this is happening, her son has to deal with a second Anglo-Sikh war, which I don't know how that happens, because the British are in charge of
They probably did it for the sake of it. They were just
did it for the sake of it.
Yeah, they probably started it and were like, oh, these people, they're rebelling. Oh, no, we're going to have to try and stop it.
And then they end up taking over the kingdom formally. So the 10-year-old Dalip Singh has to sign away his kingdom, and it's formally annexed into British territory, and he is placed under the care of a British family, so the Loggins, and they're put in charge of his education. So what they had to do at the time...
Education. He's a prince. He's been trained in stuff that he needs to know. What the frig are the British going to fucking teach? Sorry, I'm swearing. I'm getting very annoyed now. But it's just like, what exactly would they be able to teach him?
Yeah. They instruct him in essentially anglicizing himself. They teach him the ways of the English, to the point where he does voluntarily convert to Christianity as well. And after he does that, I have the date here, after he does that in 1853, in 1854, all online sources will tell you that he expressed a desire to go to England. I would doubt that, but maybe he did, because if he's living with English people, he's quite young, he's like 10 years old, whatever. young teenage boys get influenced. Even to this day, it's very easy to influence a teenage boy to do something, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he goes to England in 1854, and then he just lives there in exile. I say exile, he actually did enjoy his life in England. He was living a really cushy life in
Well, that
England.
tends to happen anyway, because even with a lot of royals
Yeah.
who have been exiled, it's just more that you can have this lovely life. It's just not, you can't control this. You have no power.
Yeah, you have no power over your rightfully owed territories and wealth, but you can live a good enough life on a pension from the India office instead. When he did get to England, he met Queen Victoria, and she was almost immediately obsessed with him. Like, she loved having him around. She would actually invite him to play with her children as well. She would invite him to hunt with Prince Albert, and he was actually quite good pals with Albert. And he even had his portrait painted by the royal painter Winterhalter.
Oh, wow.
So Queen Victoria was really obsessed with Dalip Singh. She really liked him, and he really respected her as well at the time. Sources would say that he actually presented the Kohinoor to her, and as a sign of her sovereignty over him. Which is a thing that has been documented. There is a lease where, not a lease, an agreement where he's giving over the Kohinoor to her, but he lived the rest of his life in England, and I think it was many years before him and his mom were reunited. While he was living in England, she actually managed to escape prison.
Go, Mum.
She disguised herself as a servant after a lot of building up to it. She disguised herself as a servant and escaped. She walked like across the mountains all the way to Himalaya, to the Nepal, and there her husband had told her if she was ever in any sort of conundrum, she could trust the king of Nepal to look after her. And so she went there, and he did look after her for quite a while. He built her a mansion that she could live at, and there she stayed for quite a while. There was a British resident in Nepal, and that's how the British were able to keep an eye on her, but they weren't, they didn't do anything about her escaping. They were like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. Her son's not here anyways, so she doesn't have any legal right to the throne.
I was going to say, with him not being there, then it's just, she's not a threat no more, really.
Yeah. She's not a threat, but her son did remember her, and he would often express longing to go see his mother, and he kept doing that. And finally in 1861 they let him go back, which was how, like 6, 7, 8 years after he went to England for the first time. But even when they met, it was under a lot of supervision, very strict supervision as well. And the first time he went back to India, they were all really worried. The British were really worried that this would end up causing some sort of crazy revolt.
Yeah.
And they met in Calcutta at a hotel. And at that time, Calcutta has a river that runs through it. A Sikh battalion of the British Army was returning from an expedition, and they heard that the Maharaja of Punjab was back in the country, and they swarmed the hotel, and it was really difficult to try and disperse them and get him out of there. And that was the first time that he's gone back, and he was able to see how much his people remembered him and how much they were still there for him. Like, they were ready to do whatever he wanted to. And that, coupled with meeting his mom again and hearing her side of the way that he was treated, he'd forgotten all about it. He thought the British were so nice and taking care of him. But she was like, no, you are owed a lot more than they're giving you. You should take back your kingdom. Don't do everything that they're telling you to do. And that's how he sort of gets that fire back. And he takes his mother back with him to England. She doesn't want to go at first because she's like, no, I don't want to go. That sounds bad. And she
always miserable and rains over there.
She didn't like being in England, you could tell. But she lived the rest of her life here because she was like, whatever happens, I want to be closer to my son. But she was still able to sort of tell him more about Sikhism, to tell him more about his father, because he was too young to remember his father as well. So I think that was where the little seeds of rebellion were sort of growing up again in Dalip Singh. She ended up dying of natural causes. She died in 1863, and it took a year for the British to allow Dalip to transport his mother's body for cremation. Cremation was illegal in England at the time. It took them a year to allow it. And even then, he couldn't take her back to Lahore, their hometown. He had to take her to Bombay, which is very far away from Lahore, because they were worried that if they had a funeral for the Queen of Punjab, it might cause a stir in Lahore. So he had to do it in Bombay. On his way back, he stopped in Cairo. And there he married a girl that he'd met a year ago on his way out. She was called Bamba Mueller, and she was the illegitimate daughter of a German banker and an Ethiopian enslaved woman. She was actually studying in a Christian missionary school at the time, and they met and they really liked each other. She didn't speak a lot of English, but she enjoyed spending time with Dalip, and then they got married there. So his mother actually never got to meet
his future wife
or any of his children, but I think she lived on through him in all of his daughters, and you can tell that a lot of their interests and their need to fight for their rights is so it's in their blood from Jindan. It's in their blood from their grandfather as well, from their fathers. So that was his wife. She had, I believe, 7 children.
Damn.
And 3 of them were Sophia, Catherine, and Bamba. That's how they ended up in England, this family. And it's really interesting because that means Sophia and all of her siblings are British, Indian, Sikh, Ethiopian, and German. And that is such an intersection of the empire, essentially. And I think that's really interesting that they have so many different strands of their identity as well.
So if they were around today with, having all those different passports, they could go everywhere.
They could go everywhere. Well, at that time, they could go anywhere.
Well, yeah,
okay.
But being royal, you could just go, I'm royal, so I'm just going here.
Yeah, you could literally do whatever. But yeah, they would have so many passports, they could just go wherever they wanted. But yeah, it's really cool. So they have this history from Sophia has this history from both of her parents, but she's also the goddaughter of Queen Victoria, which I've mentioned before, and that gives her basically like immunity to literally anything.
To be able to just go, I'm doing this thing. Oh no, you can't. Do you know who my grandma was?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As she was doing a lot of her suffragette activities, like selling the newspaper, like I mentioned, outside Hampton Court Palace, King George was literally like, he's on record like, is there not anything we can do about this girl? And they're like, obviously not, she's the goddaughter of the late queen. What do you mean? We can't do anything about her.
I mean, we could try, but I don't think it's going to end well.
Yeah, we could try, but nothing's gonna happen. Yes, she did go through like a bit of a traumatic, not a traumatic childhood, but within the span of 5 years, at one point in her life, her mother passed away. Her dad left his family and he moved away. So they used to live in this place called Elvedon Hall. And her dad had a pension of £25,000, which was a lot less than what was promised to him. He was promised at the time of annexation £40,000 to £50,000 pension, which was,
his mum did warn him.
Yeah, significantly reduced year after year, but they asked him to move out of his house because he was not good with money. He did not know how to manage an estate because he had never done that. He'd grown up with other people doing it for him. So when
that's probably what they wanted, though, because with the fact that he was so young and got rid of his mum and things, I bet if she'd still been around, even if she did agree to any of this, which obviously we've established she didn't agree to any of this, but if she had, I'm sure that she really would have managed like the finance side of it and going, oh, you need to do da-da-da-da-da. But because he was taken so young, and I think people want you to do that, they want you to be reckless, because then they have even more power over you then.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like they when they were instructing him or completing his education, they didn't teach him how to manage an estate because they wanted to do it for him. They wanted basically, for him to live under their shadow, under their control. Because, if you're financially independent, you can do whatever you want. But if you're not, you have to live by someone else's rules. And he couldn't handle being told to sell a house that he'd invested a lot in. So Elvedon Hall is actually, I think it's owned by the Guinness family now, and he actually redid it and extended it to be more like his palace back home. So it's quite like a Mughal architecture on the inside, but it looks like an English hall on the outside.
I like that. That sounds very magical. It's like, oh yes, I'm British. Oh, I'm this well. Yes. This as well. This is my trident.
It's kind of like Sophia and her sisters as well. It's like, yeah, we are British, but we've got these like, buds of Indian in them.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So he couldn't deal with them asking him to like give up his house, and he'd already had all those years with his mom, and he decided, well, enough is enough, and he attempted to take his family and escape back to India to try and sort of get his stuff back, essentially. But he was captured in Aden, at the time was Yemen now, by British forces, and he decided to send his family back to England, and he thought he would remain on the run to try and get his kingdom back. But he never went back to his family after that. He actually went over to France and lived there for quite a while. He actually had a second wife as well. His first wife died a few years after they came back, after this happened, because she's like aggrieved, and obviously she's mad at her husband, and she died in 1887 while she was caring for Sophia, actually. A couple of years after that, Sophia's youngest brother passed away as well. He had a crazy bout of pneumonia, and he was really, really ill, to the point where Queen Victoria called Dilip back from France. He met up with his son for a week, and then he left back to France.
Going back to his second family.
Queen Victoria never accepted his second wife, though, because she really liked Bamba and her daughters, and she never accepted Dilip's second wife, Ada.
I don't blame her, because if you think about it, Queen Victoria is a one-man woman. So
exactly.
like, she grieves for the rest of her life after Albert dies, so of course she's not going to be like, oh, you got married again, did you? No, she's gonna be like,
No.
fuck you.
Yeah,
Excuse
fuck
me, she's
you.
the proper queen.
Exactly. But after his son died, a couple months after that, Dalip Singh also passed away in France, in Paris. So within the span of like 5 years, three of Sophia's closest, um, family members all pass away, and that just basically leaves the girls orphaned. There's not much about what their brothers were doing at the time. I think one of their brothers was in the army. Another one, obviously, he died quite young, and then the last one, the first one who was an heir to the throne, he actually had like a gambling addiction, and he basically spent all of his money doing that. He was actually I think his name was Frederick, or no, Vijay, something. I'm not interested in them, obviously. The girls are cooler.
That's fair.
But he married a British woman, and that was really crazy at the time, a British noblewoman, because Queen
Into
Victoria,
race and stuff like that.
mixing. They didn't like that, but Queen Victoria did give the couple her blessing. But it is said that she asked the British noblewoman to never have children with the prince, because she was like, I can accept the union, but you cannot produce a mixed race heir. This will not be possible.
Did they break that rule?
No.
Oh.
No, they never had any kids. No one did after Dalip Singh. Actually, none of his children had any children, which is really interesting. It might be thought of as the curse of the Kohinoor, which I can talk about later.
So he himself, he's ditched everybody. His son's not allowed to have sons of his own or anything like that. But yeah, as you were saying at the very beginning, that his daughters end up becoming quite powerhouses, really,
Yeah.
especially Sophia. We did talk briefly. Like I did ask earlier, like, what do you think inspired her to become a suffragette? So she must have seen something, and as we've just learnt about what her grandmother was like, clearly it's passed on, because you can definitely see her grandma in her.
Yeah.
What was it like for her to be a suffragette? We know you've already mentioned how she sold pamphlets outside of Hampton Court, but what was it actually like for her as a suffragette? Because obviously, if you know about things like Emmeline Pankhurst or anything like that, like the women would purposely get medals and stuff for if they were put in prison and did the starvation and things like that. Did she ever have anything like that? Did she ever get arrested or anything? Because I know she's a princess and she's technically untouchable because of that. Did that mean, how was she perceived by other people? Did people like what she supported, or did they go, "You're not truly like us because you can't suffer like that"? Or yeah,
I think she was quite popular from what I've read in the circles as well. It's because I think a lot of the people who were higher up in class were quite important to the movement as well, because they could do things and get away with things and resist in ways that common people couldn't as well. Yeah, she was invincible, and she didn't suffer the way that a lot of other suffragettes did. But she did participate in all of it. She participated in the Black Friday March in, was it 1910? And do you know about the Black Friday March?
I don't know much about that now.
Okay, I'll talk about it a little bit. So basically, it was a march of about 300 women suffragettes who joined together, marched on Parliament Square to demand voting rights for women directly from the Prime Minister,
Right. Yeah.
who was Asquith at the time. They were denied by the Home
Obviously.
Secretary, Winston Churchill.
Of course.
And it is said later that Churchill actually incited a lot of the violence that happened afterwards. So at least 200 women of the 300 were violently and sometimes sexually abused, and it's called Black Friday now for that reason. And Sophia was part of it, and because she was the Queen's goddaughter, she didn't get the physical abuse, but she did use her position of power to report police officers that she saw doing that. She was able to get their badge numbers, was able to formally submit a complaint because she was higher up in class, so she could do those things. That was very interesting thing. So while she was not in there, she was using her position of power to try and
make changes and
make changes.
Get heard. And
Yes.
yeah, I suppose because at that time there would have been a lot of things twisting it. So as much as these women were being assaulted, all they're wanting is to have the right to vote, and they're getting assaulted for this. And it's more of a powerful move for her to be like, oh, do you know what these guys did? Yeah. This is how they treated us. This was a political thing.
Her word would mean more than the word of a common woman as well. And I think for someone in her position, like, money talks. And there was another story where in the 1911 census, she returned her census form with basically, ruined the census form because she knew that she could afford to pay what fine needed to be paid. In the returned form, it's actually still recorded at the National Archives today. She says, "No vote, no census. As women do not count, they refuse to be counted. I have a conscientious objection to filling up this form." So she would do things like that to basically speak to the British government in a way that they understand via money. She was also part of the Women's Tax Resistance League, I believe. Yeah, Tax Reform League. So they believed that since women weren't treated as equal citizens, they would not pay any taxes. She's a tax resistor. And because she was higher class, her tax kind of mattered. Yeah. So a lot of things like income tax, carriage licenses, dog licenses. She loved keeping dogs. She was a very well-known dog breeder, which I think is interesting because she was the granddaughter of the royal dog keeper.
Yeah, that's a nice little nod to it.
So yeah, so she had a passion for animals as well. But so she kept dogs. That everything needed a license. She had a servant, manservants especially needed insurance. And in about 1911, she was called to court to pay for it. She was fined like £3 for not paying those taxes. And she was like, "I'm not paying the fine." And they were like, "Okay, you can go," because they can't imprison her because she's the goddaughter of the Queen. And then in 1913, they call her in again, and this time for not paying her dog and carriage license. Hello, doggy. Not paying her dog and carriage license. And this time she's fined £12 and 10 shillings, and she refuses to pay it again. And they ended up confiscating her jewelry and trying to auction it off. But funnily enough, other women who were tax resistors bought it and gave it back to her. So it was a sisterhood at the time. And I think it wasn't just one person that was able to get it all done. It was the fact that everyone worked together to be able to get through it. It was really interesting. She said something in the Suffragette about being fined, and I have the quote here. She says, "When the women of England are enfranchised and the state acknowledges me as a citizen, I shall, of course, pay my share willingly towards its upkeep," which is like legal ways of,
until you notice me, I won't pay a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Until you notice me, I'm not going to pay a thing. But she did a lot of things for the suffragette cause, and she went to all of the social circles, all of the social events. It was quite, I don't know, it was quite important in a way to have people higher up in the class for the movement. Yeah,
because then it's also, it gets heard in all the circles then.
Yeah.
Because I suppose if it's just a lower class thing, then a lot of the higher classes are either just oblivious to it, or they just go, "Oh yeah, it's the working class are just doing the thing again." Yeah. But it's like, no, this is affecting all of us. Doesn't
Yes.
matter what class you are, it affects all of us. And I think that's one of the things that people also forget. Like, people forget when it comes to the vote, only a selected number of people were able to vote, and it tended to be the wealthy men. Even working class men didn't have the right to vote.
Yeah.
And from women protesting, they were then given the right, because they were like, oh, we don't want women to have the right, but we'll give these men the right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then these women, even in the higher classes, it's making them question it. It's like, are you sure you support what your husband votes for? Why should he have a say of who's in charge but not you? Because you live here too. And so it's good that there was the different class systems. Well, the class systems is a whole other thing we're not going to talk about. That's another thing. But it's good that you had these same people wanting the same changes in each class. That's what I'm saying.
I think that helped the actual cause be heard more by the government than it would have, especially if you had royals talking about it as well. And it's good that Sophia lived long enough to actually see the Equality Act come in 1928 or something, where everyone over the age of 21 was given the right to vote, men and women alike. And I think it's really cool that she saw herself take up a cause and fight for it, and before the end of life she was able to see something come out of it. Yes. And I think that was one of her greatest, legacies, is to be able to see that progression in her life. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This is genuinely, all of this has been really interesting, and I would love to learn more, but I think this is quite a lengthy episode anyway. But no, it's been really interesting, especially learning about Sophia and learning about her family and where her power and her interests and stuff has come from, because I think this happens a lot in history. Like, you hear about a significant person, but you don't forget, you tend to forget about the people who came before.
Yes.
Because everybody's inspired by something or someone. And even though she never met her grandma, you can see it in her. You can see the way that her grandma acted and fought back for her son's right. You can see that is then been in her granddaughters as well. They've got that same fire in their system, and they just want change and positivity, and they want things to be the right way. So it's been really nice to learn about that and learn about, well, not just her grandma, but her granddad as well. So it's been lovely to hear and learn where that kind of the fire and the comes from. And so I really appreciate this, and I've also really appreciate that you're telling me something about another country as well, because most of my knowledge, I don't know much about the West Indian history at all, really. In Indian history, it's not something I know much about. I know snippets from what you see when you go to heritage sites or whatever, but it's not, I don't know whether I'm just not seeing it, but it's not it's not obvious, I don't say it. So like, if I go to a museum and stuff, there don't tend to be anything to do with it. You might see like the odd painting, maybe, or the odd jewel that was taken, but other than that, there's never really, it's like we're ashamed and we've kind of brushed it under the rug, like that was a thing. So I'm really grateful that you've been able to tell a little bit of Indian history, so thank you for that as well.
I think it's good to sort of learn this history through like British figures who have the history as well. I mean, I came here today to talk about Sophia, but I got so much into the Indian history of it and the way that she even got to this country. So I think that's a good starting off point to learn more about Indian history. I mean, there's an exhibition on right now, Last Princesses of Punjab at Kensington Palace, and that talks about it's subtitled Sophia Dalip Singh and the Women That Shaped Her. So it talks about all of the women in her life that contributed to her as a person, and through that exhibition I'm sure people are learning not just about British history, about Queen Victoria, about the life of Sophia, but also about her mother, about her grandmother as well. Just sort of kind of like, this podcast is like a
little introduction to that.
A little introduction to
and I think I'm gonna have to try and go and see that. I think we should go. We
should go. Road trip.
Go to London. Woohoo! So I thank you so much, B.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy that you've agreed to be on this, and it's been very, very interesting. So thank you. I will sign us off now then.
Yippee!
Thank you. And maybe we'll do another episode at a later date talking about more stuff. Who knows?
Who knows?